stage.
Just for a minute.
Just for a minute. We wanted to talk to you.
We got the microphone set up here for you, sir.
He wants to do it down there, but I want to bring him up on stage for a second. I have something to say about this gentleman right here. I've been a fan of his for years. I'm a local movie reviewer from the Dallas area, which is not local. And I was a big fan of Monster Vision. And it's one thing to watch a show when you're 16 and have no girlfriend, so you need something to do on a Saturday night. You get to see this man get shot down by the mail girl every week. Which, on that note, I have my own mail girl that I work with. Come on up here, Anjanette. She's got a special delivery.
Is it rejection letter? If it is, it's for me.
No, it's not.
That's good.
Right here
is a plaque for Mr. Briggs that says, the second annual Sci-Fi Horror Weekend proudly presents this Lifetime Achievement Award to Joe Bob Briggs. Thank you for bringing drive-in culture to our living rooms and teaching us how to appreciate the wild and weird world of cult cinema. Keep tearing the heart out of Saturday night. This is for you, Mr. Briggs.
All right, thanks so much. Wow, people don't give me awards.
All right, we're going to move down.
Yeah. All right, well, they gave me this panel, and I thought there would be people on the panel. But apparently, for the first few minutes here, it's just going to be me sitting here talking. So, which I'm happy to do. And then a little later, we're going to have great J.D. Feigelson, Texas legend, is going to come out here and join me. J.D. is the screenwriter for Dark Night of the Scarecrow, which we're going to show later tonight, which is one of the few made-for-TV horror movies that's not a piece of crap. And and so it's one of the few successful made-for-TV horror movies. Horror and TV normally don't go together that well, but J.D. is a longtime Texas filmmaker who made, way back in the day, he made all the people that were in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre were prior to that, were in J.D.'s movie called The Wind Splitter, which is a biker movie, which you guys probably haven't seen, but that's how far back J.D. goes. So he'll be joining us. Are you getting a question?
yes.
Okay. All right. Good.
First off, your real name is John Bloom.
Yeah.
How did you come up with Joe Bob Briggs?
I was working at the Dallas Times-Herald in the early '80s, and I was trying to finish a book. I wrote a true crime book called Evidence of Love, and that became a TV movie called Killing in a Small Town. In fact, Barbara Hershey won the Emmy for Killing in a Small Town. But anyway, it's based on a true crime that happened in a little town of Wiley, Texas, north of Dallas. And I was trying to finish this book, and a friend of mine was the editor, the arts editor at the Dallas Times-Herald, and she needed a film critic. And I didn't realize at the time that it was a highly sought-after job, actually. And I said, let me be the film critic while I'm finishing this book, and then I'll step aside. And so I started reviewing mainstream movies. I mean, a lot of foreign movies, Hollywood mainstream movies and everything. And I would notice every week that nobody in the whole country would review the movies at the drive-in. And I've been going to the drive-in since I was, 5 years old in the back of my parents' car. And so I always noticed, here's all these movies that open at the drive-in. They only play the drive-in. They're only there for a week. There's no press kit. There's no publicist. There's no distribution company. Nobody ever screens these movies for me. Where do these movies come from? And so I started looking into where the movies come from, and I wanted to review them. And it was a different era in journalism, and the editors didn't really want to review. I mean, there were a lot of movies that came out that were never reviewed by anybody. And so I invented Joe Bob that no one really knew who was writing it when I first started doing it. I invented Joe Bob Briggs to be sort of like a secret thing. Only my editor and I knew what we were doing. And it just appeared, we had this section on Friday that, you know, those art sections that come out on Friday that are smaller than a regular section. Has a bunch of furniture ads in the back, and the ink comes off on your hands and makes your hands black, and it's just like a big mess. Well, we put it on like page 29 of that thing, because one thing I know about newspaper editors is they never read their own paper. And so we knew that no top editor would ever get to page 29 of the Friday greasy art section. And so we put Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In. We said, we're not going to tell anybody, she's going to appear. And so I wrote the first Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In. I went to the Drive-In. I reviewed The Grim Reaper, which is an Italian film. It's had many titles. I think Joe D'Amato directed it, but I may be wrong about that. He did. It's been a long time ago. And Joe D'Amato had many names himself, and the Italians, when they made these films, they tried to make them look like they were American films. So anyway, it was this cannibal film. The original title was Anthropophagus. They changed that for American release to Grim Reaper, and I did a little thing, you know, like this is who Joe Bob is, and he'll be going to the drive-in every week and reviewing these films. And then I started, and so every week we had a film, and I started asking the distribution companies to screen the films for me, so I could review them in advance. So the review, because the film would be gone by the time the review came out. So I wanted to review them in advance so that they could appear on Friday. And so I would call up these distribution companies and say, why do you want to review that? We don't let critics review our films. They didn't want me to let me see them. And the only person who would let me see his films, who thought it was kind of interesting, was Roger Corman. So I met Roger Corman, and we got to be friends, and I went out to his little studio. He called it a studio. It was actually a lumber yard in Venice, California, that he'd converted into a place where he could put up some sets. And I said, Roger, what are the basic elements of? You can't call them B movies when you talk to Roger, because if you say, Roger, do you make B movies? He'll say, I do not make B movies. B movies are that implies that if there's an A movie and a B movie, and that mine is the worst. And I said, well, do you make exploitation movies? And he said, I love it when you say exploitation movies. He loved to be called an exploitation filmmaker, but not a B filmmaker. And so I said, so what are the elements of the exploitation film? And he went on at some length about it, and it basically is what I developed into the 3 B's: blood, breasts, and beasts. Those are the 3 elements you have to have in an exploitation movie. You have to have a fear factor. You have to have some female nudity, and you have to, and the good ones have a monster or a villain of some stature. And so blood, breasts, and beasts became, and then later I added boots for kung fu when we had kung fu in the movie, but so that you could have the 4 B's. But so I developed the drive-in totals, you know, where every week I would write, you know, how much of this, how much of that. And I tried to do it with nobody knowing who I was, nobody knowing who wrote it. And but you know, people will seek you out and investigate you and try to figure out who it was. And so I could only keep that up for about 2 years. But from the very beginning, we got a huge amount of fan mail, and by the time the editors figured out that we had it in the paper, it was already too big for them to get rid of it. And so we kind of sneaked it in, and then it went into syndication, and we were home free. There was only one other guy who was reviewing these movies, and that's a guy named Bill Landis, who was a gay hustler in Times Square in New York, and he would go to all of the Times Square grindhouses and review the movie and the audience, and he would put them in this little fanzine that he had called Sleazoid Express. And Sleazoid Express was one of the best publications at the time about exploitation movies, and I just devoured every issue. So there were only 2 people in the country. People don't, today on the internet there's thousands and thousands and thousands of reviews of exploitation movies. But there were only 2 people that were doing it. Bill Landis was doing it in his fanzine, and I was doing it in the Dallas Times Herald. And we were actually, challenged. I was challenged. Bill didn't care, but I was challenged, by mainstream critics to defend it as, they said I was reviewing porn in a mainstream paper, which I was not. They were all R-rated films. I mean, they had porn. A lot of them had porn names, like Gas Pump Girls. That was a big German sex comedy. So you had that kind of like Beach House. I don't know if anybody remembers Beach House, but it was like the all-time breast count champion. There's something like 120 breasts in that movie. There was like Beach House, Beach Balls, Beach Girls. There was a whole beach series, in the 80s, and so I was reviewing those as well as the horror films, as well as the sort of like really low-budget action films, and that's how that got started. And I got kicked out of every place. Newspapers would pick up the column. It would run for a few weeks. They would get protests, usually from the Baptist Church or some interest group that didn't like the reviews, and it would get canceled, and then they would say, we're going to have a poll of our readers to see how many like it and how many dislike it, and we'll go by the poll to see whether we put it back in or not. They would have these polls. I would win 96-4 in every poll, and they still wouldn't put it back in. They would say I lost. They would cheat on the polls, and so anyway, I just kept getting kicked out of every place in the country, and from the very beginning, even when it was above ground, it was underground. You couldn't get it.
Now, you were the first to do this, and now there's websites like AnnaColeNews.com, and there's so many I can't even name them. Do you ever just sit back and go, I started that?
Well, they all give me credit. They all give me credit for starting it. And I used to, and even from the beginning, it's like I would be introduced as the world's foremost expert on exploitation movies, but there would always be at least 5 guys in the audience who never leave their apartment and watch 8 movies a day. And so, they always knew. There was always somebody who had a count of number of movies watched that was greater than mine. And then with the invention of the internet, they had a forum. All those guys had a forum. They had a place to put those reviews up. And but half of it is knowing the material, and the other half is being able to write about the material in an entertaining way. And a lot of those sites are good. A lot more of them are not very good in the sense of the way they write about the movies. They're encyclopedic, in that they have all the titles and they have all the information on the titles, but they're not really that descriptive as far as it being a good way to sort of get your bearings and know what you want to watch. And then see, about 10 years ago, when all the technology for movie making became so cheap, now there's 10,000 a year, that are writer, director, producer, editor, cameraman project, where the guy, it's not that, it doesn't cost that much money anymore to make a 90-minute movie. So we have this huge glut of movies, and somebody's got to wade through it and figure out what's worth watching and what's not. So it's a different world today.
Well, eventually you actually kind of moved didn't move, but you moved from the printed page to the screen.
Well, what happened is I got fired. I got fired at the Dallas Times-Herald for being such a good writer. No, I got fired for, there was a protest, and the particular guy who protested was a black Dallas County commissioner who said I was a racist. And I had survived every other charge that was ever made against me of being anti-Baptist, anti-woman, and I was anti-everything. Because, you know, the way the column was set up is it was like, it was just a machine gun. And every week I would hit this target, and hit that, and that one, and that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. And then every once in a while somebody would scream, so I'd hit them 20 more times. You know, that's how you do. That's how satire works. You know, you figure out where the sacred cow is, and then you just keep hitting it, you know. And so we had this protest, and on TV, with TV cameras rolling, the editor of the Times-Herald said, "Okay, as of this moment, Joe Bob is dead." And I was making a speech in College Station, and came back to Dallas, and I was dead. And so he came to me and he said, "We want you to still write your John Bloom stuff, but the Joe Bob stuff is gone." And I said, "Well, you know what? John Bloom is resigning in solidarity with Joe Bob Briggs." And so Joe Bob was fired and John Bloom resigned. And so I got all these invitations to, I would get invitations to the Kiwanis Club and places like that to appear as Joe Bob, so it wasn't entirely strange to me. So I got this invitation from this guy who wanted me to come to Cleveland and do a full show that he wanted to sell tickets for. And he was a promoter, he was a concert promoter. And I thought, well, how bad can it be? I've never been to Cleveland. If I bomb there, I'll never go back to Cleveland. And so I went to Cleveland. Actually, it was Berea, Ohio, which is right in the flight path of the Cleveland Airport. The Berea, Ohio High School and Convention Center. And the very first time that I performed as Joe Bob was for about 1,000 people, which I don't recommend as a way to do that for the first time. And about half of it was horrible, and the other half, you know, went okay. And I had these country western songs that I would sing that would bail me out when I got in trouble. You said you were a virgin, but your baby ain't named Jesus. Did y'all? I sang that on TNT. Maybe some of you heard it. I would sing these songs. I had a couple of backup musicians, and so we got out alive. We got out of Cleveland alive, and then I started going around the country doing it on the college circuit, and then finally the movie channel invited me. Anybody have the movie channel? It's like really rare for somebody to actually still have the movie channel, but it's the sister network of Showtime. It's one of the really early premium cable channels, and then it got surpassed by HBO and Showtime and the others, but it was one of the first ones. And so the people that had it, it might have been the first cable channel they ever had on their set. And so they invited me. They had this thing on Friday nights. It was exploitation movies. It was just crap movies that they bought in Europe that they wanted somebody to introduce. And so I went on and introduced them. Actually, they had seen an article I wrote for Rolling Stone where I was hanging out with Dennis Hopper on the set of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And they saw that and they called me and they said, "Come and do this thing." And from just for 1 month, just for 4 shows. And I did 4 shows, and I said, "Let's try that again." That was good. So we came back and did 4 more shows. And after like 3 or 4 months of that, I said, "Okay, let's make it a regular deal." And they had all these other hosts on the network that were doing romantic comedies and classic Hollywood. And as time went on, all of it just kind of faded away and disappeared. And I said, you guys are spending a whole lot of money to bring me up here to the big fancy studio in New York. let me just shoot these things. I can really shoot these things cheaper in Dallas. And so we moved the whole thing to Dallas in Ross Perot's studio. Remember when Ross Perot ran for president? He had to build a whole TV studio to run for president. And so after he ran for president, there was nothing to do with the TV studio. It's the nicest TV studio you've ever seen in your life. You ever been to a TV studio? You know how they're always ugly on the outside? They look like a warehouse. Not Ross's studio. It looks beautiful. Looks like, you know, this looks palatial, you know. And he had this state-of-the-art studio. Nobody to work in it. In fact, when Ross was running for president, he was like, he had his pointer and his charts, and he would say, hey, the budget's getting too high, and, you know, there'd be a pop-up arrow, and the budget would go up there, and Ross would, you know. Well, if you had been able to pan the camera over to the left, about 15 feet to the left, that was the whole Joe Bob set. That was the Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In set was all over there, and so we would wait till Ross was nowhere near the building, you know, because he was kind of crotchety, and he was like, he wants to go in and do his pointer and his budget, leave, you know. And so I would make sure I wasn't there when he was there, you know. And we didn't want him asking questions about what was all this crap that was over there, you know, what the Joe Bob set was. But we started shooting the Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In. We were on for 9 seasons, and those aren't just, or 11 seasons. 85 to 95 or 96, and those aren't like normal. That's 52 weeks a year of double features every week, you know. And then when that ended, just moved right over to Monster Vision. Pretty much did the exact same show on TNT. The only thing that made it harder is on those TNT movies, you're not just on 3 times a night. You know, some of those movies have like 11 commercial breaks in one movie. You know, like sometimes I don't have that much to say about those movies. You know, we had these, and they had some turkeys, man. They bought. Sometimes you buy movies. You know, you buy like 50 movies, and you only want 3 of them, but you got to buy the other 47 that are in the package. You know, so we had this movie called Super Beast. Anybody ever see Super Beast? Well, you're lucky. It was made in the Philippines. It has no discernible plot. It's just this guy wandering around in the jungle for 2 hours. And they said, do you think you can show Super Beast on Monster Vision? I said, well, I can show anything on Monster Vision. And so we had a contest to, I would send you a case of beer, a case of Old Milwaukee. Think about it. I can send you a case of Old Milwaukee if you could successfully describe the plot with the motivations of every character outlined. And nobody won, which was, well, we were happy. The Turner Television legal department was happy because they said, I cannot send a case of beer as a contest prize through the mail, that we would never be doing that again. And so we had that one, and then we had a movie called The Howling Seven. Has anybody ever seen that? Howling Seven. They retitled it as The Howling New Moon Rising, but the people that owned The Howling would just license that name out to whoever the hell wanted to make the movie. And so this guy from Australia, who fancied himself a movie star and a director and a biker and a producer and a writer, made The Howling 7, and he was allowed to use footage from all the previous Howlings, and he shot it at this place called Pioneer Town, which is a abandoned movie ranch in near Palm Springs, California, where they used to shoot all the B-Westerns. And they made, they had this horrible plot. It didn't make any sense. But they had this country western bar that's sort of the heart of Pioneer Town, and they would cut these groups singing and line dancing and all this country western stuff, and then they would have the, you know, they do that thing where they reverse the negative, so it becomes werewolf vision, you know, and they're just, you know, you do the camera like this, and you know, and that would be the killings. And then they would go back to a another song with the whole cast singing, and then they would have, you know, spectral line dancing in the barn. And then, well, anyway, we showed this movie, and it was just, I said, you know, this may be the worst movie ever made. I don't think I've ever seen one this bad. But it had a sort of authenticity because all the people that lived in Pioneer Town were actually in the movie. And so we showed it, and everybody went, wow, did I just see that? And you know, a lot of people, like, my show was on really late on Saturday night. So a lot of people were under the influence of various substances, and so they were like, so the mail the next week was like, wow, what was that thing that you showed? It was so weird. Would you show that again? And then we got a lot of mail from the people who were actually in the movie. And they were said, hey, we didn't know they ever finished that movie. Really? I didn't know I was in the movie until you showed the movie. And so we showed it again, and then we showed it a third time. Every time we showed it, we'd get a higher rating. We were creating this, you know, so bad I can't believe I'm watching it kind of experience. And I went to New Line, and New Line owns it. And I went to New Line and said, you really got to bring this out. You got to bring it out on DVD with a lot of DVD extras. You got to go find this guy in Australia who made it. He fled back to Australia. But I couldn't get New Line to understand the concept. I said, hey, we have millions of people wanting this movie. You got to bring this out. They've never brought it out. You can get an old VHS copy of it if you want to see it. It's like it's really interesting to watch. But I've always wanted to do like the full Criterion collection, you know, DVD of the Howling Seven. We had some terrible movies.
You had a lot of great ones though too.
We had some great movies. Ted Turner had bought the MGM library in the early '80s, and he still owned all these great old horror films that were owned by MGM. But usually they wouldn't show them. They wouldn't let me show them because they were black and white. We don't show black and white. We don't want to show black and white. I'm like, well, colorize it. Well, we're not going to colorize Todd Browning's Freaks, so we can show it one time on your show. You know, because Ted Turner was known for colorizing. But at some point, he just stopped colorizing. I don't know why. And so they had like half the films were colorized, half weren't. I guess colorizing just didn't work out. You know, people just didn't like it. And so we had all these great black and white